Last night, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings opened in theaters, so now it's time to update my ranking of all 25 MCU movies from worst to best. I'm only counting the movies, I'm not counting any of the Disney Plus shows or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or any of that, just the movies. So, last place at number 25 is The Incredible Hulk. If you ask most people what their least favorite MCU movie is, most people will either say The Incredible Hulk or Thor the Dark World. And I'm in the camp that says Incredible Hulk is worst because, unlike Thor the Dark World, nothing happens in this movie. Bruce Banner isn't even Hulk for like 90% of it. It has a slow, boring plot, and apart from a few plot points, feels super disconnected from the MCU anyway, since Edward Norton ended up being replaced by Mark Ruffalo, who has a very different personality than Edward Norton. And the movie also set up Tim Blake Nelson to be a villain, but that plot thread still hasn't come back even all these years later. Number 24, Thor the Dark World. Unlike The Incredible Hulk, this movie has some entertainment value. There's action sequences that are very reminiscent of Lord of the Rings. Tom Hiddleston steals the show as Loki, especially his banter with Chris Hemsworth, and you really feel like they were raised together as brothers. Unfortunately, the film is bogged down by an uninteresting plot with a ton of exposition and a poorly written, uninteresting villain. Number 23, Captain Marvel. The character of Captain Marvel just isn't that interesting because she's essentially just Superman. Her whole character journey is trying to remember her past, and when she finally does remember her past, you find out she's a super powerful alien who also committed genocide, and yet we're still supposed to root for and sympathize with this character. The film also plays it too safe for a film release during Phase 3. It feels more like something that would have come out during Phase 1. It also feels more or less like a cheaper version of Guardians of the Galaxy. It's like the scriptwriter said, okay, so what did people like about Guardians of the Galaxy? Well, they liked the retro music, so let's set this film in the 90s so we can use 90s music. They liked the aliens. Okay, let's bring in Ronan, which also distracts from the movie because it just makes me wish I was watching Guardians of the Galaxy instead. They liked Rocket and Groot, so we get Goose, who is used to turn Nick Fury into a joke. This just feels like a delayed Phase 1 movie that's just a dollar store version of Guardians of the Galaxy. Number 22, Iron Man 2. This film tries to do too much at once. It's trying to further Tony Stark's character arc, but also trying to set up for Avengers. There's too many plot lines going on at once. Tony learns his arc reactor is poisoning him, so he needs to learn how to fix it. Whiplash is seeking revenge. Justin Hammer is competing against Stark Industries. They're setting up for Black Widow. This feels like 4 or 5 different movies that are all blended together, and it just feels overstuffed. Number 21, Thor. I don't have any huge problems with this movie. It's just not as good as the other movies up on this list, and I don't really have that much to say about it because there's not that much to the film anyway. There are some well-written jokes. The plot is decent. It's just kind of weak, though. The other movies higher on this list are better. Number 20, Iron Man 3. Unlike most people, I was fine with the Trevor Slattery Mandarin twist, especially after having watched Shang-Chi The Legend of the Ten Rings last night. Because the idea of evil people using an innocent pawn to be the fall guy while they work in the shadows is further explored in Captain America the Winter Soldier, so it felt like a very natural setup for that film. Also, the character of Harvey is very funny, there's some good banter between him and Tony, and I think the plot's actually pretty solid. Number 19, Avengers Age of Ultron. After the first Avengers was so epic, this feels like a bit of a step down, both in terms of plot and scale. There are some good scenes, like when they try to lift Mjolnir. The film gave us the character of Scarlet Witch, and James Spader is absolutely chilling as Ultron. But the stakes in this movie just don't feel as urgent as the first Avengers. The film slows down, so we can try and set up a romance between Black Widow and Hulk, which never comes back anyway, thus rendering that plot point completely unnecessary, and also set up for Civil War. It's still a decent film, just not as urgent in terms of the stakes. Number 18, Black Panther. While I do think that the character of Black Panther is cool, and there are some very cool scenes that feel like they're out of a spy movie, the plot just isn't that interesting. The rules of a Wakandan society make no sense. They don't choose their leaders based on who's the best for the people, they choose them based on who's the most brutal in combat. And they're so distrustful of each other that at the beginning of the movie, they send another spy to spy on their own spy. And the end of the movie just frustrates me because they say they're going to open Wakanda to help the rest of the world, but you just had a war amongst yourselves. So the plot is a little, and the rules of the society just don't make sense, and it has a lot of problems. Number 17, Doctor Strange. The visuals of this film are very cool. Strange has a good character arc. It's well acted. But the third act just falls a little bit flat for me. The battle just kind of redundant and just isn't as exciting as some of the other MCU movies. Number 16, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. The main problem with this movie is the humor. Most of the humor is incredibly crass, and there's also too many moments of humor. There are scenes that are supposed to have this big emotional impact, but instead of letting the audience feel the weight of the moment and letting it sink in, they decide, nope, we're going to immediately make a joke. Number 15, Iron Man. I'm not a fan of Iron Man as a character, but this film is very well made and has a great plot. This was released at a time when superhero movies, with some exceptions, generally weren't very well received, and the fact that they got the director of Elf to direct this big-budget superhero movie, which was about a character most people hadn't heard of, and on top of that, they cast Robert Downey Jr., who at the time was a washed-up actor that nobody wanted to work with. This film seemed like an almost guaranteed failure, but it was great, and well, look where we are now. Number 14, Guardians of the Galaxy. This is another film that seems set up for failure. A comic book most people haven't heard of. Getting Andy Dwyer from Parks and Rec to be the lead in a superhero movie seemed like a strange choice. Two of its characters are a raccoon and a tree, but the ensemble cast works very well off of each other. The plot is interesting, and the characters are very relatable. Number 13, Thor Ragnarok, or as I call it, the good Thor movie. This Thor movie is actually fun. It's actually entertaining. However, I feel like having Hela, Grandmaster, and Surtur all in the same movie is unnecessary, as it makes the plot keep jumping around. I think the Grandmaster is a little too silly of a villain, especially compared to how insane and creepy Hela is, and the Grandmaster also kind of distracts from the stakes a little bit. It also feels like they're trying to somewhat copy Guardians of the Galaxy with the tone and some of the jokes, but it's still very entertaining. Number 12, AntMan. For the most part, this does somewhat break the traditional MCU formula in that this movie is a heist movie, which hadn't really been done before up to this point. The whole cast is fantastic, the jokes are hilarious. Scott Lang is a very likable, very relatable character that we want to see succeed and turn his life around. However, in some ways, the plot feels a little too much like Iron Man 1. Number 11, Spider-Man Far From Home. This is the natural epilogue to Avengers Endgame, as we see Spider-Man and half the population piece themselves back together after having been gone for 5 years, and Peter wondering what to do now that his mentor and father figure is now dead. There's a lot of great plot twists. However, I can't stand Zendaya as MJ, and I feel like some of the jokes are a bit too crass for a Spider-Man film. And there's one very cringeworthy scene that absolutely did not need to be in the movie, involving an adult female S.H.I.E.L.D. agent telling teenage Peter Parker to take off his clothes. Yes, it's so he can put on a new Spider-Man suit, but the way it plays out is just so cringy. Number 10, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This breaks the traditional MCU formula, and it goes in some wild directions. It's one part martial arts movie, one part fantasy, the very likable lead, the action's well choreographed, the fantasy creatures are very creative, the fantasy elements are very out there, but what holds this movie back a little bit is Awkwafina. She was just not very funny. Her jokes just didn't land that much for me. Number 9, SpiderMan Homecoming. Spider-Man's first MCU solo film. Tom Holland does a very good job at playing Peter Parker. You can sympathize with the villain. However, having Tony Stark in the movie kind of distracts from it being a Spider-Man film. It kind of doesn't let him be his own character. It just kind of feels like he's just mini Iron Man. Number 8, Ant-Man and the Wasp. The sequel to Ant-Man is even better than the original and even funnier. Paul Rudd and Evangeline Lilly work off each other very well. The characters have definitely grown since the first film. However, I think the film's villain is kind of forgettable. Number 7, Captain America, the First Avenger. Out of the Phase 1 movies, this feels the least like a superhero movie, but in a good way. The main character isn't born with these powers. They aren't a god. They were just an ordinary person trying to do the right thing who was in the right place at the right time. The script is very well written, the action is some of the most fun in the MCU, and the fact that it's a World War II period piece as opposed to a traditional comic book movie works very well. Number 6, The Avengers. By far, the best thing about this movie is the cast. The whole cast works very well off of each other. There's a lot of quick back and forth between them, and the stakes are high, and the story is big and epic. Number 5, Captain America Civil War. Considering this has Captain America's name in the title, it feels less like a Captain America movie and more like an Avengers movie, but that's also the great thing about it. The plot's very interesting. It doesn't feel the need to take sides. It lets the audience choose who they're going to root for. I think Zemo as a villain feels unnecessary, as the main conflict is the Avengers fighting amongst themselves, and Zemo kind of distracts from that. And this film was the debut of Tom Holland as Spider-Man. But the main issue I have with his introduction scene is how careless Aunt May is. She lets Tony, this adult man she's never met, into her teenage nephew's bedroom alone, and he even locks the door. And he tells Peter to lie to May about where he's going with said adult man who is a stranger to her. Aunt May is a terrible guardian. And also, the main issue I have with the movie, Steve Rogers is kissing his niece, and no one acknowledges this. Number 4, Black Widow. This is a very well-written, well-directed movie. You really feel for all these characters. The plot has political intrigue, and it feels like Mission Impossible mixed with The Incredibles. This is what Incredibles 2 should have been. Number 3, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Also very similar to Black Widow. Political intrigue. The plot is a very Tom Clancy-esque thriller. I feel the stakes on this one are a bit higher than Black Widow, which is why the movie's higher on the list. And this is the movie that actually made me ship Captain America Black Widow, and they should have gone through with it. Number 2, Avengers Endgame. An almost perfect finale to the Avengers saga. I say almost perfect because there are 2 issues. In the final battle, it's on this huge planet with thousands of people, yet somehow all of the main female characters just happen to be in the exact same spot at the exact same time. There's only so much disbelief I can suspend. And also, as I said before, Steve going back to live with Peggy means that in Civil War, he's kissing his niece. If it weren't for those 2 issues, this would have been a lot higher, but it falls just a bit short. But number 1 is the Avengers Infinity War. The opening scene of this movie does not hold back. We're introduced to Thanos as the massive threat that he is right off the bat, and the stakes only get higher from there. Every character and cast member works very well off each other, which is amazing because there are a ton of them. There's like 30 characters in this movie, so it should have felt bogged down, yet it didn't. The final battle is the most exciting since Civil War, and the ending is the most shocking of the MCU. It's a very well done movie, and it comes in at number 1. So go ahead and share your ranking of the MCU, and I will see you next time.